Alright, drawing with ink and making depth. Alright, let's start off with a circle. Sorry for the bad video, and my cat. His name's Loki. He'll be part of this tutorial. You might hear him purring in the background. Let's start with the light and the shadow. Alright, so there's different ways to do shading and depth and light when it comes to drawing with ink. Here are a couple of the ways. This is hatching, cross hatching. I don't know what this is called, but there are famous cartoons. There's an artist that does these drawings, and he does amazing. And then takes forever, but that's another style, is just dotting. What I like to do is the first two, hatching and cross hatching. And so that's what we're gonna. Here's Loki, my pet cat. As you can see, he has beautiful coloration. Loki, thank you. Alright, so light comes in from here. And from there, I usually like to start off with shadows. Because from there, sorry, focus is not good. From there, you can then work your way to the light, per se. Now, what I'm doing here is making sure that it's darker the lower it gets, but it's also kind of dark up top. That's because the light is penetrating right here. It's the focal point. Sorry. Right here is the focal point. And so there is going to be a bit of shadow back here. Another technique you can do is to thicken the outlines. That helps a lot when it comes to depth. I myself am a beginner, but it might help people if I don't say a bunch of big fancy words. Don't get me wrong, the big fancy words help a lot. It can just be overwhelming a lot also. Now I am crossing in the whole thing. You can actually start to see the different amount of shading I'm doing. You can see dark, medium, and kind of light. And then, of course, since this is the shadow, I gotta draw the actual shadow. Now, if you think the light's here, do you think the shadow's gonna be heavier further away or closer? Yep. Shadow will be stronger or darker closer to the actual object. And then it'll also fade away as it gets further away from the object. You want them to be touching so that they're connected, the shadow and the object itself. There's one of my favorite paintings, actually, where there are these cows and the shadow to the cows are not connected, so it looks like they're floating, and I love it. But if you want your object to be grounded, then I suggest the shadow stays connected to the object. So another good example for cross-hatching is that it doesn't always have to be straight lines like this. They can follow the curvature of the object. So here, a sphere is round, sorry, my bad. So they would be cross-hatching like this. You can sort of see that. And how I do that a little bit. And it gives it more shape instead of just straight cross-hatching. But if the object is straight, then you can just straight cross-hatch. And there we go. It's sort of a little bit elongated. And then, oh, here's my cat, Loki. Excuse me, bud. Love you, bud. You gotta go down there. So, ink. That's what we're working with, right? So I'll give you another example. Ink in of itself is not fluid. It is liquid. And so from that shape, it's sphere-like, but then it has kind of elongated part to it. So let me switch up where the light comes from. So you always have your point of light. And the exact opposite will be the shadow. And for here, like it's the light circle, the light's gonna hit it and it's gonna be following that shape. So it's gonna be a little bit elongated. And then there might be a break in it so that there'll be more light. Something like this. You can also draw it out before you start to shade it in because it's going to be covered up and you're going to barely notice that there is markings like this, as long as you do it really, really light, because then you can do heavy markings, lighter markings. And then we start over by the shadow so that you don't make as many mistakes. And once you get the feel of the ink on the paper, you can start to lighten it up. I am fully coloring it in so that we don't see the markings. And then to counteract that, I'll make this really, really dark and thicken the outline. So that when I color this in, it looks very light. Sorry. The lighting is not good and the camera keeps going in and out of focus a little bit. So for ink itself, make sure you color everything or shade everything in, because if there's any white space left besides the highlights, you're gonna be like, is that a highlight or is that supposed to be colored in? So I'm just kind of going through and coloring in the loose parts so that it appears like more crisp, if that makes sense, or more clean. You're not confused what's a highlight and what's not. And I can make a couple more because that was really dark. And the lighting is going to be exactly the same. So if it's coming down from here, the highlight's going to be a little bit lower. That's really bad. My bad. This is my first time explaining and or doing a tutorial. on highlighting. I'm usually just drawing it out myself. But there's some ink and the shadow. And there's some depth to the ink itself. I'll give an example of squiggly, and this time I will draw a pyramid. If you guys have any suggestions on what to draw, let me know. So here's a tricky one. Light is coming off from the top, and down below is the shadow. How do you guys think this one is going to be shaded? That's right. It's going to be really dark down here. And then it's going to lighten up as you get to the top. And since it's coming down from the top, it's going to be the same at all angles. And there will barely be a shadow. Again, sorry for the bad camera. Doesn't really focus all that well. Trying to make this lesson quick too, because I know you guys are probably bored of me talking. Went outside the border, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. Art is never perfect. You can always find things to improve on. Always can learn more. I put this one kind of at an angle too, because that's where we're seeing it, is at an angle. This one is straight on, but this one, we're kind of seeing it like at that much of an angle, if that makes sense. And so there's another example. And then, I know these are all just examples, but if you know how to draw with shapes, then you can figure out the lighting to whatever you guys want to draw, and then draw it. It will take time, but if you have the patience, you can draw anything. So, simple one, a tree. If you know the lighting of a tree, so the trunk shape is cylinder, and then the trees, if you take a photo and look at where the lighting is, trees have layers to them in the leaves, and the light, the sun, that being, is always coming from the top. So the top is usually light, and then the bottom layer, sorry, focus, tree is always a great example actually, will be darker at the bottom, medium, and then it'll be light at the top. This is very simple. And then you do this several times. It doesn't have to be very detailed, but a lot of artists, when you notice that they draw trees, they're very detailed leaves, not like down to the exact leaf, but you'll notice this exact pattern, that the top of the leaf branches, or the tops, will be really light, the middle will be less light, and the bottom will be extremely dark in coloration. And if the painting or the artist, if it's in color, the top will usually be like a yellow color, and then the middle might be like a blue. No, the middle, my bad. The top will usually be yellow, the middle will be green, and the bottom of the leaves, and there'll be several of these within the tree, will be like a dark blue, almost teal color for the shadow. And it's very fascinating, really, the more you look into it. And you can be as detailed or as vague as you want to be when it comes to shadows, too. That's the whole point to sketching, really, is that it's very vague. Well, a lot of the times. Some sketches are very detailed. So that it's very vague, and you're just getting in where the light and the shadows touch each other. So there we go. We got our very vague leaves. And then obviously there's going to be a shadow because the tree leaves are 3D and they're kind of all around. So I'm going to do a little shadow here in the shape of the bush that is directly under the trunk. And then the trunk itself, since the sun's coming from here, depends on where you think it is, but most trees, they will have sort of their highlights in the middle, and then on the edges it'll be really dark, and the further you get closer, or the closer you get to the middle, it will be really light. Sorry, drawing and talking are not my forte. And again, I'm just doing this all with ink, one color. If you want to get creative, you can get a pack of different ink colors and you can experiment and explore with the different colors of ink. See, there's a prime example of cross-hatching. And then at the base, it's going to be pretty dark because it's furthest away from the light. I'm not going to add any of the tree bark texture. I'm just showing you basic shading in ink, but some people will go in and add texture to the bark. But if you add texture to bark, you're adding all those individual lines. So let's say this is all bark. Then you'd have to add light and shadow to each one of those lines, and it gets very detailed. So there's sort of, it's not really a rule, but a lot of people follow it. Wherever it's really dark, like per se, I'm shading here, that's the darkness. The next one right behind it has to be really light. And then it can start getting darker again. Because dark on dark, you can't really tell a contrast or a difference. But if it's dark against light and then dark, there's that space that you can tell the different value of. That is another lesson for another time, though. Let me know if you want to learn more about that. And so that would be like bark texture, but I'm not doing that. I'm just working on the lighting. So the sun's coming down from this angle. So then the tree shadow would go this way. It would angle that way. And as you know, it gets lighter and lighter. The further it gets from the object, the shadow gets lighter and lighter the further away from the object. There we go. Remember to connect the shadow with the object. And there you go. There's the basics of shading and working with ink. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something of value. If not, let me know how I can improve. Till then, draw with you next time, I guess.